Hi and welcome to Knit with Hannah. I'm Hannah. We're looking at the 3-needle cast off if you have only one row of stitches. Hi and welcome to Knit with Hannah. I'm Hannah. I'm here with Knitting Natter to help you learn to knit the easy way. Yes, the 3-needle cast off. We already have a video for that, but it shows you how to do it when you have stitches on 2 different needles. For example, if you're knitting a shoulder seam, you've knitted all the way up the front and you've knitted up the back and you have the same number of stitches on each needle, you can cast off with 3 needles. So this time when I was knitting up home items for the new collection, I came to a point where a couple of the items I was knitting had seams at the end of the rows, and I thought, now I can cast off and then sew the seam, or how about I try and manoeuvre the stitches all around and cast off at the same time as creating the seam. Now the 3-needle cast off is a really great way to do that. In my mind, when I looked at it and when I did it, I reckon it took less time to do this than it would have done to cast off and then sew the seam. Let's get straight to the demo. This is the result we're looking for when we do a 3-needle cast off. We basically do 2 things at once. We are casting off and we are effectively sewing the seam at the same time, which saves us a job. While it may look a bit fiddly to start with, once you get used to it, it's actually quite quick. Okay, so let's get to this. You can see at the other side it's actually really neat. I've done that with 2 of these here already, and we're going to use 2 different methods depending on what you've got at home. So what we have here is one of the lavender bags from my collection that I've knitted up, and here's the other design. So we have, let's do this one first, shall we? So the first option is that you have a 3rd needle. Now this needle, ideally it would be the same size, but if you don't have a second pair in the same size, what you can use is a needle in a smaller size. If you use a larger size, then you're going to stretch the stitches somewhat. But what we're going to do is take a look at this. We have 44 stitches on the row here. We're going to take half of those and put them on a 2nd needle, and this will be the needle that's a pair. Oh, that last stitch has come undone. Let me just do that for you there. There we are. So what I'm going to do is just shift half of these stitches onto this other needle. When you are slipping stitches in bulk, you do exactly what you do when you're slipping stitches singly, and that is you can hold these stitches, the needles parallel, and you basically just move 1 stitch at a time over to the other needle. It looks like you're purling because you're putting the needle in between the loops of the stitch like that. There we are. And as we get to the middle, I will just double check my counting. Okay, that was a kind of a guesstimate how many we have. So I have 5, 10, 15, 23. So I'm just going to move that one back over there. Now this is where you can now bring in the smaller needle if you need it, if that's all you've got, or I'm going to just use another needle of the same size. So now I'm going to slip all of the stitches from the same row onto this one here, and you can do them 2 at a time if you want. Just be careful. This isn't taking me long, and it's taking me much less time than it would be to cast off. So there we go, that's one part of it done. Now the next part, we still have this needle that we were knitting with, and we are going to put the stitches that we moved across first with the, crucially, the working yarn at the end onto this 3rd needle. So we're going to just move those across. This looks complicated, and what is she doing, you may ask? But it's a crucial point to all of this. I'm splitting these needles up, these stitches up, So we have half on one needle, half on the other needle, and we have the two ends with the working yarn ready to go. There we are. So that's the working yarn sat there. What we can do is turn them round like that, and they're ready to go. Now we have right sides together, not wrong sides together, and that means that this is the side we want to see once the whole item is finished. There we go. So those sides that we want to see when it's finished are facing each other. We have the inside of the finished lavender bag on the outside here. So now I have the right size needle. This is crucial. We have the needle that is the correct size for knitting with this yarn for this pattern in the right hand now, and we have 22 stitches on each needle, half and half. So we're going to now do the 3 needle cast off. You may have seen that in another video, but let's just do that now. I'm going to put the needle into the first stitch on the front needle, and then into the first stitch on the back needle. That one doesn't look like it's in there, right? There we go, that's better. Okay, so we have into the first stitch and into the first stitch on the back needle. We're going to knit those at the same time. So the yarn goes around just as if you're knitting. You pull that yarn through, drop it off the back needle, pull the same yarn through and drop it off the front needle. That's your first stitch. Now we're going to do the same thing with the second stitch. The needle goes into the first stitch and the second stitch as if you're knitting them individually, but you're knitting them together. We drop that off the first and drop that off the second needle. Now, because we're casting off here, we are going to do exactly what we would do with any other cast off. We're going to move that first stitch over the second stitch. There you go. And that's the first stitch cast off. Now we're going to do exactly the same thing again. Into the stitch on the first stitch on the front needle, first stitch on the back needle, and we're going to knit them together. There we are. And now we're going to move that first stitch over the second one. Knit the next ones together. You can move that yarn through the needle at the same time. Yarn over and across. Into the stitches at the same time, yarn around, pull the loop through, drop them both off at the same time if you're feeling confident enough, or you can do them one at a time, and the first stitch goes over the second one. Yarn around, pull that loop through and drop them both at the same time, or one at a time if you'd prefer. There we go. Now this is going to get into a rhythm. Knit and cast off. Knit and cast off. Knit and cast off. Note, I'm keeping these stitches, they are 3/4 of an inch or even an inch away from the tips now that we're getting further along. Otherwise you may drop the next stitch if you're not careful as you're knitting. Here we are, last one. So we cast that one off, and then we have a single stitch left. We can just cut that and pull that loop through. There we go. So we have cast off and created a seam at the same time. There you are. So we did that with 3 single-ended needles. Now, if you want to, you can of course use double-ended needles, and that will be quicker maneuvering the stitches. And the other option is, let's do this one now, to very simply use a circular needle. What we're going to do is, now you could have knitted the previous row with this circular needle. If you bring that in for the last row, you could easily do that. But what I'm going to do is just move all of the stitches over to the circular needle. There we are. Okay, we're going to use this needle to finish off. What we're going to do is just count how many stitches we have. Let's do it from this end. 5, 10, 15, 22. There we go. And we're just going to pull that cord through so that they are separated and they are sat quite happily, both of them on the tips. And what have we just done? We need to put the right sides together. So I just maneuver that around like that. And we do exactly the same thing again, but it was faster, wasn't it? We didn't have to do quite so much moving from one needle to another. It was that quick. So this is the kind of result you'll get if you use double pointed needles too. So that is split there. The 22 and the 22 are sat here, and I'm just going to do exactly the same thing. So into the first stitch on the front needle, into the first stitch on the back needle, knit them together, cast off. First, knit two together, and then cast off. Okay, I'm going to do that all the way along this row, like that, and we will have yet another quick way of seaming without getting your sewing needle out. If you struggle with your sewing, you really don't like it, then this is a great way to just cut that out of your knitting a little bit more. There we are, that's the last one again. And there you go. So that is the seam done with a circular needle, and you can also do it like I showed you with 3 needles. There you are. So there you go, you can knit the 3 needle cast off if you have a single row of stitches. And yes, of course, go and find yourself a spare needle, the same size or a smaller one, or indeed go and find a circular needle, and that's a great way to do it as well. Okay, so those lavender bags are part of the new home collection, and I'll be showing you another technique that I used while I was creating those next week. That will be sewing the seams. When it comes to sewing seams on things, if you have row ends that you need to sew together, then you can use lots of different methods to sew them. I'm going to show you 3 methods to sew seams next week. I do hope you'll join me for that. Do hit subscribe and click on the bell for notifications. YouTube will let you know when that new video is around if you click on the bell, and of course it will let you know whenever I'm here with a new video too. I'm here every Tuesday, every week. Thanks so much for joining me. I'll see you again soon. Bye for now. Happy knitting.